your macros. Fats, high energy, slow to utilize, utilized in different ways within the body. And a lot of controversy around, I guess, higher fat versus lower fat. And then, people also, I guess, confusing, the fact that the body uses fat at rest for the need to have, a high fat diet and why that actually is. So that's the nutritional side of it covered off. Now I'm going to go into the energy systems because I think I went a little deeper than what I meant to go there, other than to obviously say that every, protein, carbohydrate and fat all have much, much smaller chains, so, smaller units, and then they are used in the body in different ways, and they're used in multiple different ways. There's not just one system that they get used in. So they are, very, very fascinating little items. So therefore, leading into the energy systems, the body has three main ways that it generates energy, and they all come into play at different times, and they are and will be pretty much used in different proportions at different times depending on what you're doing. So at rest, the body is predominantly using what we call the oxygen system, the aerobic system. So essentially, as the name implies, you need oxygen to be able to make that work. When we're at rest, again, we are predominantly using fat as an energy source. So, that's because we have plenty of oxygen to be able to burn that, and it's the most efficient way of doing it. So the way that the body works is it obviously stores the carbohydrate that we eat, and it prefers to store it, in the muscle as glycogen or in the liver as glycogen. And that's really saved for when we're doing that high intensity work, or when we actually have to do something more strenuous than just kind of, sit around and talk. So that's why the body is using body fat. So when people talk about fat burning, it's really interesting because, of course, we are fat burning when we're at rest, but your body will then restore the excess calories. So you can burn as much fat as you like at rest and not exercising, but as soon as you eat those calories in excess of what you need because you weren't exercising, then the body will, because it's so smart, and we talked about that, how it will then turn that protein and turn that carbohydrate and that fat, obviously, into fat and store it for later use. So the cycle being, if all you're doing is not exercising, saying, hey, I'm burning fat, every excess little piece of food that you're eating is then getting stored and added to your fat. So you're burning fat, but you're laying fat back down, burning fat, laying fat back down. So that's really, really simple about the at-rest system. So the next system is your ATP-CP, high energy system. Now, this doesn't require oxygen, so it's an anaerobic system, but it also doesn't require glucose. So it's that first power, 10 seconds, by 30 seconds, it's pretty much expired. So it's that 1 hour all intensity kind of gets you going. So if you're thinking about, a baseball hit, someone just whack, hits the ball, they need all that big energy, or a jump. Someone has to kind of do a huge, jump up and get the ball in a sport. A powerlifting move, or weightlifting, where it's just that all-out, one-out effort. And even, the first 3 reps or so in a normal weight session, it's explosive, it's fast. And that essentially is what is using that particular system. So that system, at that point in time, is not using any carbohydrate. It is using creatine phosphate and within your body, and the ATP, which is the adenosine triphosphate, breaking apart, creating the energy, but then your body will use a system to replenish that. So that takes about 3 minutes. So that's why you have that all-out bit of power. You rest for 3 minutes, boom, if you go back again, you can do it again. I'm going to talk now about recovering that system, because I figure I might as well deal with it now. So essentially what recovers it is oxygen. So whilst you're in that particular 10-second moment, you are not using the oxygen, not requiring oxygen, there obviously becomes a deficit, and you need to then breathe, and that, the oxygen forms part of replenishing that. Interestingly, it's protein which supplies the fuel to replenish that, and sleep. So apparently the reproduction of ATP within the muscle cells happens in that first 2 hours of sleep. So getting that really good ATP recovery for explosive sport is sleep is really, really critical. The other thing which is really, really important is, and this is something which I think there's over 20 years of research now, is creatine. Because obviously creatine phosphate is the power thing, creating that reaction. And there's over 500 studies being done, and about 70% of those showed that there was definitely an improvement in the the performance in power output, maximal contraction from supplementing with creatine. So that's one of those very, very, very well researched and well proven that does have a role in improving that particular type of performance. So likewise, training allows the body to utilize that energy system more effectively. However, it's limited. There's about you can get about a 15% improvement. And this is just in contrast to aerobic, where you can train and you can actually get like a 50% improvement from training, whereas you are still limited in that explosive energy system, in how much you can make that more efficient or make the utilization of the ATP more efficient. So the key thing with that is it gives the energy very, very quickly. Aerobic cannot supply energy that quickly, but it's very short-lived what it can supply, and it's limited in what it can supply. But you can obviously improve what it does by a supplement like creatine, and that's why that's something which has now been in sports nutrition for over 20 years. Obviously a lot of controversy when it first came out, but now 20, 25 years down the track, so much research, and it is definitely a proven ingredient or a proven supplement, and something which, again, it's not one of those ones which you necessarily notice it immediately, but with utilization over time and consistent training, there are definite benefits for using that. So that's just kind of summarizing that very, very first energy system. But I will stress that system is used in like every sporting activity. You can't jump straight to the aerobic system. Like, you will use that system no matter what the intensity. Obviously, if you're just kind of warming into a cardio session, you're not going to utilize that to its maximum that it can be. But particularly people who are doing anything where it's an explosive movement, whether it be anything with resistance, sports with power, your CrossFit type activities, even almost anything really, because you think about a sprint start in a sporting match, or a rowing where people are just having to have that all-out power, or even in a running race where people have that burst towards the end. That's when they call that energy system. So whilst it's the one which kicks it off, it sits there in the background and it's able to be used. So that's just something really, really important to remember, that particular energy source. So I guess that's what's telling me, is that creatine has a really, really good benefit for pretty much any activity, any sport. Okay, second energy system, which then kind of takes over after that one, is the what they call the glycolytic anaerobic system. So essentially what that's saying is it's no oxygen and it uses glucose. So because there is no oxygen, you cannot use fat directly in that energy system like what you can in an aerobic system, where there's oxygen around. You cannot use ketone bodies in that particular energy system. It has to come from glucose. So whether it be from amino acids which have been turned into glucose, whether it be from glycogen which got broken back down to glucose, whether it be from direct glucose in your bloodstream, that particular energy system has to use glucose. Now that's the one which kind of picks up after the ATP-CP dies off or gets burnt out. And that kind of is fully kicked in by about 30 seconds, 45 seconds, it's kind of coming out, and then by 2-3 minutes, you're pretty much switched over to your aerobic system. So that's for that intermediate. And what I would believe is that, most weight training sets fall into that, because if you ever time yourself, they probably take about 35 to 40 seconds to do a good, 10 to 12 rep set. I know a lot of the F45 uses different, they'll do like 20 seconds things, 35 second, 45 second, and 1 minute, a whole bunch of different time lengths, but essentially those are all working within that particular range there. The thing with that as F45 style as opposed to a weight training style is the rest is so short that you essentially then bring in your aerobic system, whereas weight training, you do tend to rest that kind of 2 to 3 minute, which is allowing that system to replenish itself. So that's, to me, the main difference, where both are using the explosive, but the longer term of the one with the shorter rest isn't allowing those systems to recover. So you are switching over more and more to aerobic because you don't have the reserves. And that's where having the stored glycogen becomes so important to be able to keep on functioning at that higher level. Whereas with your weight training, you will bring in a smaller amount of the aerobic system, but you are predominantly working in that anaerobic glycolytic system, where you're working at 85% or more of your VO2 max. So with that particular system, as I said, because you don't use oxygen, so you have to fuel it from other sources. The most efficient way still is to fuel it via carbohydrate and glycogen stored in your muscle for the best performance. Just a couple of things to note: that you do not get as much energy out. Well, sorry, you're actually using a lot more different systems to have to create energy from things like your proteins and your fats and what you do from the carbohydrate. So for an efficient workout and for making things the most direct route, that's where the carbs do come in. So in terms of what you can store in your muscle, you can store about I believe it's about 500 grams of glycogen throughout your body, which for most people in weight training, that would probably be enough to do a pretty decent workout, and the cardio that you're doing afterwards as well. So I don't think bodybuilders don't need to go as crazy or as high in the carbs as what people who are doing endurance type sports do, but there still needs to be a good amount of carbohydrate to put to basically recover what they're doing. And this all comes back to me is that when you're taking in protein and you're trying to grow, you really want to be putting as much of that as possible towards retaining that muscle and allowing your muscle to synthesize muscle tissue, rather than putting that protein potentially off for energy systems. So it's like, if you're trying to grow, you want to give it every chance that you can for the protein to go to the right place, because your body will prioritize and take that for energy if you don't give it enough. So to me, to grow muscle and get the results out of the gym that you're looking for, my preference is definitely to fuel my body with carbohydrate and utilize the protein for recovery and repair and growth. Whereas with other sports, it's probably less important, or they may not have that desire to have as much of their excess protein going towards laying down muscle, and they're quite happy with it, being switched over and utilized to create fuel. So that's that system. Now I'll switch over to the aerobic system. So there's basically that's going to kick in around that 2 to 3 minute mark. The key thing, you need oxygen to burn the carbohydrates, to burn the glucose, or to burn the fats, or to burn the ketone bodies. So that's the main fuels that you're utilizing during an aerobic thing. There are 3 different phases to the aerobic. And I had to take notes on what they're actually called because I keep forgetting. But basically, it's when the first one is the glycolysis, where you're essentially breaking down carbohydrate to create the acetyl coenzyme A to go into the Krebs cycle, or you're actually feeding directly into that Krebs cycle. Or then you have the electron transport, which is like the final part of the aerobic system, and that's really where all the energy is generated. There's a couple of ATP at each of the other ones, but there's 34 created at that very, very last part of the system, which is pretty much, compared to like 2 in the other systems, that's where the bulk of it's created. So essentially what that's saying is you can create so much energy from the fuel burnt in the presence of oxygen, but it just takes so much longer to get there. So it's not designed for high intensity work as much as it's designed for that lower intensity, long-term type of work, which is what we associate it with, cycling, running, all those long distance type of things. However, keeping in mind that the energy systems can kick into play at any particular time, and what the role of the carbohydrate or the glycogen in the muscle is to be there to be able to kick into one of those higher energy, faster output type of parts. So if you're in, you think about look at, if anyone's watched cycling, they cruise along, and then someone kind of makes a break and everyone has to follow. So they switch over to a totally different energy system, and that's why they need to have those glycogen reserves sitting there to be able to do that, because if they don't have those, pretty much they're going to go hit it, and body's just like, nah, I don't have this. And that's really what causes most of the failure and fatigue in any kind of sport, is that the energy system that you need absolutely fails. So coming back to the energy system, to the aerobic energy system, if you're doing lower intensity work, and again, this is where, in bodybuilding, we all talked about fat burning cardio, and the idea was to be running at that 65 to 70% of your VO2 max. They used to say the torque test. Could you do your cardio and still torque? Then that meant that you were actually directly in your fat burning zone. So people, I guess, were kind of thinking, okay, I'm directly burning fat. The fat is coming off of my body. I am in negative calories.